You did what?
The hospital corridors were unnervingly silent, save for the occasional murmur of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses moving from one patient to another. The cold fluorescent lights bathed the polished floors in a sterile glow, while the sharp scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. Claire adjusted her cardigan over her scrubs as she scanned the patient list for the night. Most of the names were familiar, patients she had been tending to for weeks, some recovering, others still battling their conditions. But then her eyes settled on room 214, Henry Dawson. Her stomach tightened. 1 minute. Henry was one of the forgotten ones, the kind of patient who never had visitors, never received calls, and whose bedside remained devoid of flowers or get-well cards. His medical chart was bleak, late-stage illness, unresponsive to treatment, with mere hours or perhaps a day left. Most nurses hurried past rooms like his, only stopping for the essentials. But Claire wasn't like most nurses. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself before pushing open the door. The room was dimly lit, a single bedside lamp casting elongated shadows against the muted blue walls. Henry lay motionless beneath the thin hospital sheets, his frail form barely causing a ripple in the fabric. His breathing was slow, labored. Then, as if sensing her presence, his eyelids fluttered open. You stayed," he whispered, his voice weak. Claire stepped closer, wrapping her cool, trembling fingers around his. "Of course," she said softly. "No one should go through this alone." His lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "Most people, they don't stay." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm not most people." A nurse passed by outside, glancing briefly into the room. Moments later, Dr. Bennett appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Claire, you're still here?" he asked, his tone casual, almost indifferent. She nodded. "You don't have to," he said. "He doesn't have anyone left. You're not obligated to stay." Claire's jaw tightened. She knew what he meant. Henry had no family, no visitors, no one to grieve when he was gone. But that didn't mean his life didn't matter. "Time spent with someone in their final moments is never wasted," she said, her voice steady. Dr. Bennett sighed, shaking his head as he walked away. Henry let out a weak chuckle. "You don't listen much, do you?" Claire grinned. "Nope." A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind that didn't require words. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each passing second. Henry's breathing grew shallower, his grip weaker, but Claire didn't move. She refused to be someone who left when it mattered most. Adjusting his blanket, she gently dabbed a damp cloth across his forehead. "Do you need anything, Henry?" she asked softly. For a long moment, he didn't respond. She thought he had drifted off to sleep. Then his lips parted. "Just keep talking," he murmured. "Tell me something good." Claire swallowed the lump in her throat and thought of the ocean, the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore, the warmth of the sun against bare skin. She told him about summers spent with her grandfather, about the stories he used to tell, the way he hummed old jazz tunes while fixing things around the house. Henry listened, his tired eyes soft with remembrance, as if for a fleeting moment, he had been transported somewhere warm, somewhere safe. The quiet beeping of the heart monitor filled the room, a constant reminder that time was slipping away. The glow from the bedside lamp cast gentle shadows across Henry's face, tired, worn, yet somehow peaceful. Claire sat beside him, her fingers still wrapped around his frail hand. Outside, life carried on, doctors moved between patients, nurses exchanged updates, the world continued spinning. But in room 214, time stood still. Henry let out a slow breath. "It's strange," he murmured. Claire glanced at him, waiting. How a life can feel so long, and yet, in the end, it seems so short. She squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue. "I used to think I had all the time in the world," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Enough time to fix things. To make things right. But then you blink, and suddenly, it's gone." A sad smile tugged at his lips. All that time, wasted. His breathing grew more labored, and his grip tightened slightly. Claire could feel it, the silent fear, the unspoken plea. "You're not alone, Henry," she whispered. "I'm right here." His eyes, once heavy with sorrow, now held something else, peace. The heart monitor beat steadily. Then, slower. And slower. A tear slipped down Claire's cheek. "It's okay," she murmured, brushing her thumb over his skin. "You can rest now." Henry exhaled one final time, and then, silence. Claire sat there for a long moment, still holding his hand. She had done what she could. She had stayed. Reaching over, she gently pulled the sheet over his shoulders, smoothing his hair as if tucking him in one last time. The door creaked open, and a nurse peered inside. Taking in the stillness, the quiet acceptance in Claire's posture, she nodded. "Time of death." 3:47 a.m., the nurse murmured. Claire barely registered the words. She exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of it settle into her bones. But she didn't regret a second of it. Henry hadn't died alone. The hospital corridors felt heavier as Claire stepped out of room 214. Life around her continued as normal, nurses chatting at their stations, doctors hurrying between patients. But inside her, something had shifted. Henry Dawson was gone. She had done everything she could. She had held his hand through his final moments. Made sure he wasn't alone. But as she stood there, gripping the counter at the nurse's station, she realized how empty the moment felt. There was no family to call. No loved ones to notify. Henry had lived alone, and now, he had died alone. Except for her. She let out a slow breath, ready to push through the exhaustion and finally head home. "Excuse me, you Nurse Claire Evans?" She turned. A man stood in the waiting area, dressed in a sharp black suit. His expression was unreadable, his posture calm yet authoritative. He carried a sleek leather briefcase, and something about the way he held himself immediately unsettled her. "Yes," she answered cautiously. The man stepped forward, offering a hand. "Daniel Carter," he introduced himself. "I was Mr. Dawson's attorney." Claire blinked. Henry had an attorney? "I need to speak with you regarding Mr. Dawson's final wishes." Her pulse quickened. "Final wishes?" Daniel nodded, gesturing toward the hospital lounge. "If you have a moment," he said. Claire hesitated, then slowly followed him. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Claire followed Daniel Carter into the hospital lounge, her mind racing with questions. She had known Henry only in his final days, an old man with no visitors, no connections. And yet, here was an attorney, speaking of final wishes. Daniel gestured toward a seat, setting his briefcase down with a quiet thud. He opened it with practiced precision, retrieving a sealed envelope and a stack of documents. "Mr. Dawson left explicit instructions regarding his estate," Daniel began. "And you, Nurse Evans, named in his will." Claire blinked. "Me?" Daniel nodded. Mr. Dawson had no known family. He drafted his will months ago, but recently made a revision. He requested that everything be left to you. Claire's hands gripped the chair's armrests. "That doesn't make sense. I barely knew him." Daniel's gaze remained steady. "Perhaps, but you were there for him when no one else was. That meant something to him." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. She thought back to Henry's final moments, his whispered regrets, the way he had clung to her hand. Had he known all along what he planned to do? Daniel slid the envelope toward her. "He also left you a letter." Claire hesitated before picking it up. The paper felt heavy between her fingers, the ink of Henry's shaky handwriting scrawled across the front, for Claire. She swallowed hard, breaking the seal. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And if I know you at all, you're probably questioning why I left everything to you. The answer is simple, you were the only person who cared. I wasn't always this alone. Once, I had a family. A wife I loved more than life itself. A daughter who was my whole world. But I let work consume me. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and every small moment that mattered. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. My wife was gone. My daughter wanted nothing to do with me. I spent years waiting for a chance to fix things. But some chances never come. Claire felt her throat tighten as she continued reading. Then you walked into my hospital room. You didn't see me as just another patient waiting to die. You talked to me. You listened. And in those final moments, you gave me something I thought I'd lost: peace. I don't have much to give, but what I do have, I want you to have. I hope it helps you chase whatever dreams you've been too afraid to pursue. And more than anything, I hope you never waste the time you're given. Thank you, Claire. For everything. Henry. Tears blurred Claire's vision as she folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest. Henry had spent his last days burdened with regret. But somehow, in those final hours, she had given him something worth holding on to. She exhaled shakily, looking up at Daniel. What exactly did Henry leave me? Daniel pulled out another document. A house. Some savings. And a key. He placed a small brass key on the table. It looked old, well worn. Claire stared at it. A key to what? Daniel smiled faintly. That's for you to find out. Days passed before Claire finally gathered the courage to visit the address listed in the documents. The house sat on the outskirts of town, nestled behind overgrown hedges and a rusting gate. It was old but charming, with ivy climbing up its stone walls and a porch swing creaking in the breeze. Taking a deep breath, Claire slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door groaned as it swung open. Dust particles danced in the sunlight filtering through lace curtains. The air smelled of aged wood and forgotten memories. But the moment she stepped inside, she understood. The walls were lined with bookshelves, each one filled with weathered novels and journals. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys untouched but waiting. Framed photographs covered the mantel, pictures of a younger Henry, his wife, and a little girl with bright eyes and an infectious smile. A lump formed in Claire's throat. This had been his home. The place where he had once loved and lost. And now, he had given it to her. Her fingers brushed over the edge of a bookshelf when something caught her eye, a stack of letters, bundled together with a faded ribbon. Each envelope was addressed to the same name, Emily Dawson. Henry's daughter. Claire hesitated before picking up the top letter. The postmark was old, the ink slightly smudged. Had she ever read these? Had she even received them? A wave of determination settled over her. Henry had spent years drowning in regret. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to fix what he couldn't. The next morning, Claire sat at her kitchen table, Henry's letters spread out before her. She didn't know if Emily would be willing to hear from her, but she had to try. Pulling out her phone, she searched for any information she could find. A few clicks later, her heart pounded. There she was. Emily Dawson. She took a deep breath and dialed the number. The line rang once. Twice. Then. Hello? Claire's grip tightened on the phone. Hi, is this Emily Dawson? A pause. Yes, who's this? My name is Claire Evans. I was with your father in his final moments. Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Claire pressed forward. He left something for you. And I think you deserve to have it. 2 weeks later, Claire stood outside a quiet cafe, heart pounding as she spotted the woman walking toward her. Emily Dawson had the same bright eyes as in the old photos, but they carried a guarded look, as if she had long since learned to protect herself from disappointment. Claire, she asked hesitantly. Claire nodded. Thank you for meeting me. Emily crossed her arms. You said you were with my father? Claire reached into her bag, pulling out the bundle of letters. He wrote these to you, she said softly. I don't know if you ever got them, but he wanted you to have them. Emily stared at the letters as if they were ghosts from a past she had buried long ago. After a long moment, she reached out and took them. As Emily slowly flipped through the letters, Claire watched as something changed in her expression. Pain. Regret. And maybe, just maybe, the first flicker of forgiveness. She looked up at Claire, her voice quieter now. Thank you. Claire smiled. Sometimes, we don't get to fix things. But sometimes, we do. As she walked away, Claire exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Henry Dawson had been right. Time was precious. And now, she intended to make the most of it. The hospital corridors were just as silent as the night Henry had passed. But this time, Claire didn't feel weighed down by loss. She felt something else, hope. Because sometimes, even in goodbye, there was a second chance. In summary, Claire Evans, a nurse, forms an unexpected connection with Henry Dawson, a dying man with no family. She stays by his side in his final moments, unknowingly becoming the person who meant the most to him. After his passing, she learns that he left his estate to her, including a house filled with remnants of his past. There, she finds letters addressed to his estranged daughter, Emily. Determined to reunite father and daughter, even after death, Claire tracks Emily down and gives her the letters. Their meeting offers Emily a chance to understand the father she lost and Claire a renewed sense of purpose. In the end, Claire realizes that time is fleeting, but kindness, and the connections we make, can leave an impact long after we're gone. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe to my channel for more amazing stories.